Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavidvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us, may he guide us, and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace. And good evening. So this is our final class for this season, and after tonight there will be some special events that we'll talk about at the end, but for our regular Friday nights, this will be the last one till September. So we are in the middle of a talk called God and the World by Swami Ramakrishna, and Atma is going to start. All right.
The lover of God, on the other hand, sees that instead of bringing enjoyment, these desires are the source of all his miseries. He understands that in God alone can he find the satisfaction of all desire, for his infinite bliss and all other pleasures are finite and perishable. Anandam, or bliss, is the best definition of God. And if God is bliss, no man is an atheist, because everyone is seeking a happiness which has no break, and that happiness is God. The real ideal of every human being is Satchidanandam, eternal life, infinite knowledge, and everlasting joy. For all men wish to live forever, to be all-knowing, and to have eternal bliss. But God alone is all life, all knowledge, and all happiness. Therefore, God is really the ideal of every living being.
Don't you love his logic? He's very clear. He also reminds me of a Christian Science hymn. Only God can give us gladness, only God can give us peace. So they've got gladness and peace in the same hymn. All right, so let's take our last paragraph here.
Ramakrishna used to say, first, let a man know his infinite nature. Then let him play with the finite. First seek God, and then the world. Or as Christ taught, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. Let God shine alone in his glory. Now we let the ego shine above him, and we throw God into the background. We make him the last consideration. We seek matter first and spirit afterwards. We should reverse the process. Our hearts also must be free from any ulterior motive. If we love God for what we can get from him in the world, we really love the world and not God. And we can never be true devotees. The true devotee loves God just for the joy of loving him, because God is his beloved.
Yeah, and one important attitude that one can take is to be God's servant, or God's hands, you could say, hands and feet in the world, and that you love God and you want to do whatever he wants you to do. So, and that's one way of approaching this problem of trying to put God first and not putting the world first, because the world is always in front of us and God's always in front of us, but it's in less tangible, invisible form, and so we tend to get distracted by the exterior appearances and forget the interior. All right, now we get to go on to the next chapter, which is true worship of God. If you're going to be a lover of God, we want to know how to worship God. So he's going to tell us in this chapter.
self-existent bliss comes from God alone. The little happinesses of this world are only reflections of that perennial bliss. But like that great happiness, these little happinesses are born of sattva, or the state of pure serenity. Rajas, the state of excessive activity and rest, the human state, and tamas, the state of darkness and ignorance, or the brute state, can never give happiness. Whenever happiness comes, it means that a little of the ultimate bliss is reflected in the mirror of the mind. The mind, however, must be pure. Otherwise, there can be no reflection. An impure mind can never be happy. When the mind is pure, that is, when it is free from all sorts of debasing desires, then alone is it fit to think of God.
I'm glad he brought that out so many times. The idea of sattva isn't quite as clear as it can be. And it's the state of pure serenity, and it's the highest reflection of Brahman. It's the revealing guna. In other words, tamas veils, rajas projects, and sattva reveals. And so it's still one of the gunas, it's still part of Maya, but it's the most revealing of the true nature of existence, consciousness, bliss, or Brahman itself. And so that's why we try to go higher and higher on the guna scale, if you can say that, up to the sattva, but eventually you have to transcend the sattvic state as well. All right.
Man can realize God only when sattva predominates in him. If he's able to persist for some time in the state of sattva, then he begins to gain a clear picture of divinity. The sense plane is the plane of tamas, the intellectual plane is the plane of rajas, but God is beyond these two planes. He has no form, therefore he cannot be touched. He cannot be heard or smelled. And he is also beyond the reach of our intellectual faculties. Only when a man can go beyond all these ordinary perceptions of the senses and the intellect can he realize what God is. And only he who lives beyond all touches, tastes, forms, who is absolutely pure, from whom the last taint of impurity has been washed off, can become truly one with him.
Is that the end of that paragraph?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's the end of that paragraph. All right, yeah, so this basically repeats pretty much the same idea here, that God is beyond the sense planes in the world, and really only the sattvic aspect of the gunas is the one that gives us any inkling of what it's like. And so that's why we try to be as sattvic as possible so that we can get glimpses, and then once you get those glimpses, then you can see the attraction. You have to have clues as to where you're going. Otherwise it's very difficult to proceed. And so this is why we go after the sattvic things in life, so that we can be attracted to God, where the most of the impurities are washed away, and we begin to see the reality of God within. All right, so next.
Until we attain the state of sattva or balance, we cannot worship God truly. If we wish to get rid of fears, make ourselves perfectly free and happy, there is only one way. We shall have to worship the Lord of the universe. He alone is pure. He alone is free and blissful. Those who wish to free themselves from the bondage of the material world do not care to worship the minor aspects of deity, who give only what is to be had in the universe. True seekers after freedom are not concerned to have their desires satisfied. They want to go straight to the Supreme, or to the incarnations who are direct manifestations of the Supreme.
I'm a little surprised that he's now mixing in the Sattvic the Sankhya interpretation of Sattva. He started out with the Shankara interpretation, or the Advaitic interpretation of Sattva, as being the revealing aspect, but now he's reverting back to the Sankhyan interpretation, which is balance. But I don't think balance is quite as clear. Doesn't tell you why you're going for it. It's supposedly the balance between the tamasic, which is sort of inactive, thought of as inactivity, and rajas, which is activity. But I suppose if you think of the nature of Maya as being the waves on the lake, you could think that if you, well, except inactivity would still give you a flat surface, so that really doesn't work either. I really prefer the idea that sattva is the revealing aspect, and that's why we worship God. And he also brings up another good point, though, here, is that traditionally, religions all over the world, it doesn't matter what part of the world you look at, the beginnings of religion were worshiping of various deities that were the various power energies in the universe. The thunder god, the rain god, the river god, the wind god, the fire god, and these were worshipped because they had to survive, and so they had to have crops, they had to be able to control the fire, they had to be able to get rain, they had to be able to sustain themselves. But it's in the Sanatana Dharma, we get this marvelous rising from that level up to this idea that there is only Brahman, and all of these are aspects of it. In many of the other traditions, the other deities are simply thought of as imaginary, whereas they're not really imaginary. Those energies really exist in the universe, and you really can do sacrifices to them in order to get things in the world. But so Hinduism manages to recognize both those ideas, is that you can worship lower deities if you want to get things in the world, but that's not really going to be ultimately satisfying. The only thing that's ultimately satisfying is to go for the Brahman aspect, that infinite, undivided, unchanging aspect, that Satchidananda aspect. All right, let's continue.
If, however, a man believes in a perfect, all-good God, how can he believe that an evil universe can come out of such a God? All that is prepared out of sugar must be sweet, so all that comes out of God must be good. Hence, these great souls never find fault with the universe, because to find fault with the universe is to find fault with God. However men may revile or persecute them, they do not care. Always they worship God and care for nothing else.
Of course, and the other way of looking at it is that once you've manifested a universe, it has to come out in pairs of opposites. So if you're going to have pairs of opposites, you're going to have good and evil. But that's an interesting idea that he's bringing up. Another way to look at it is to think, well, it's all coming from God, so how can we find fault with the universe? Well, yeah, you can't find fault with having to be in duality. If you're going to be in duality, that's the way it is. There's no fault finding. It's just the nature of being in a world of duality and multiplicity. All right.
There were 3 Alvar saints in southern India. Each wanted to pay respect to the other, because great devotees are always glad to bow at the feet of other devotees. The same thought came to them all, and each set out to find the other. They were overtaken by a terrible storm. They had not even a piece of cloth to protect them. One found a little hut where there was just room to lie down. He was very jaded by his long journey on foot. As soon as he went in, he stretched himself out to rest. Now, the second Alwar, however, also came that way and saw the hut. He looked in, and finding a man there already, he inquired whether there was room for him. Although the first Alwar was very tired, he replied, "Where one can lie down, two can sit." And he sat up to make space for the newcomer. But soon the third Alwar appeared at the opening of the hut and asked the same question. The other two, rising quickly, said, "Well, where two can sit, three can stand." So they stood huddled together in the narrow shelter. Because they were all so happy, free from selfish concern, and so indifferent to poverty and hardship, God appeared to them. Bright light shone forth from each face. By that, each recognized the other. Joyous shouts of praise broke from their lips, and a wonderful hymn was composed, which is preserved in India to this day.
So that goes along with the idea that unselfishness is the test of all religions. That was one of Swami Vivekananda's famous sayings. And he who is the most unselfish is the closest to God. So these people were completely unselfish, and they were able to realize the God within each other as well as in themselves, and recognize their oneness in great joy. Oneness brings great joy, because it's only in feeling separated or different from others that there's fear. If you don't feel any separation or difference from others, then you don't have any fear. So, all right, let's continue.
It was the sattvic condition of these holy men which made it possible for them to perceive the divine presence. They showed what state a man must be in to see God. He must never complain. He must see the God in everything.
Good in everything.
Good in everything. He must be an optimist and never find fault with God's universe. Those who wish to get rid of all miseries and attain freedom must worship God with a contented heart, devoid of all fault-finding. They who worship the minor aspects of deity, in order to have their desires satisfied, will always stay in the universe. Oh, they may go to heaven for many years, but they will have to come down again. They're like the bull tied to the oil press. They must go round and round as if bound on a wheel. But they who worship the Supreme, not to gain anything, but only because they love Him, they go beyond this universe and reach that place from which they never have to come back.
And so really we see too in this that the worship of God is not confined to the shrine room or the temple, but it's also worshiping God in others, just as they did. They were unselfish to each other. And so that's a way of interpreting this. That he's talking about worshiping the Supreme, but he's also, the main example he's given here is worshiping God in others. So we have one more paragraph in this chapter.
You cannot love God and mammon at the same time. You cannot worship both at the same time. If you worship the gods or minor aspects of deity, you cannot realize the Supreme Lord. In order to realize God, you must worship Him with the whole heart, and the man who has realized God is perfectly happy. Even if he should go to hell, he would be in heaven, for he lives in God. Where God is, that is heaven. He carries God with him whenever he goes, so he has heaven everywhere. Saints and sages make holy places holy because they carry holiness with them in their heart. Such men live in their own heaven.
Yeah, so really, our heaven is a condition of our mind, you could say, and the higher mind, the transcendent mind especially. Our regular mind is more fickle. We can create a heavenly space in it, but until the transcendent mind has been made one with God, that doesn't stick. But once that sticks, then even the lower mind is able to hang on to that bliss and happiness. All right, well, we will attempt at starting this next chapter. I'm not sure how much of it we'll get through tonight. We may have to stay tuned till next September, but we'll give it a go here. Union with God.
The very mention of whose divine name purifies us and illuminates the hearts of all those who have the desire to hear the Lord, because he is always the friend of the good. All the miseries that are to be found in the hearts of men, he destroys. Miseries are always inside man and not outside. Well, we think they're outside, and that is not the fact. Take a log of wood, cut it, burn it, it will not mind. Why? Because it is not conscious. When we take a man, insult him, hurt him, he will feel it. Why? Because he is conscious. Now, where is this consciousness? Inside? Where inside? It is centered in the heart, not in the brain. A man may have his brain injured, still his consciousness continues. Although his mind may be deranged, but injure the heart, and at once consciousness leaves the body. This shows that the chief seat of consciousness is in the heart. Now, good and evil, victory and defeat, profit and loss, only exist when we are conscious of them. That is, they exist in consciousness, and therefore they must be inside.
So the same idea that it's a mental state that can bring us peace of mind. Oftentimes, if one you could say resigns himself to their current situation, or simply accepts, might be a better, more positive term, that they can have a much happier outlook. If they constantly try to figure out a way to be in some other circumstance, like it's always greener on the other side of the hill type consciousness, then they're always kind of miserable and they don't see the good things that are around them already. And so we need to learn to appreciate what we already have and the situation that we're already in and the opportunities that we already have, rather than constantly seeking something else and bemoaning the fact that we don't have opportunities for some other things that we seem to elude us. All right, let's continue here.
The ordinary man of the world believes that all miseries are outside him, beyond his control. For that reason, he is so miserable. But when man has no attachment for earthly things, when he realizes that behind the world there is an almighty power who is all friendly, then his mind will be directed more and more away from the world and towards this all-powerful and all-friendly being. He will seek out those people who will talk to him of God. He will try to go to those places where men have realized God. These are called holy places because of the holy men who have lived there. As a man goes more and more to such places, talks more and more with such men, the love of the world will gradually leave him, and he will come nearer to God.
And there's a certain vibration in holy places and people that, and holy people that you pick up on when you're in their presence or when you're in those holy places. And that's of course, the advantage of pilgrimage. But also, as he's mentioned before, you can take a pilgrimage in your mind. Basically, your mind can take you to a holy spiritual place, a heavenly state of mind. And so you become that holy place, and you can become your own holy company. There's an inner guru that is waiting to guide you if you can open yourself up to it. But these other things will help us in the meantime before we're able to really be in touch with that pure inner guru. These holy places and holy people will help to raise our own consciousness, increase that sattvic vibration that we were talking about earlier, so that we get a clearer conception of God. All right? We got a big paragraph here.
Since furthermore he is a conscious being, he must work in consciousness. And through this he finds that good and evil are inside. He sees that he is only happy because he is conscious that he is happy. He's unhappy only because he is conscious of being unhappy. That is, that in consciousness all evil exists. In consciousness all happiness exists. So he learns to go within himself for everything. God teaches him that if the mind can be detached from the outside world, then no evil will exist for him. Matter is the cause of all misery, of all misfortune. The less we have to do with matter, the better it is for us. The man's mind becomes pure. He learns this lesson. God purifies his mind, and he sees all within himself. He also sees himself in all beings. God, with reference to his creation, is finite. He is infinite as to his mind and as to his consciousness. God never sleeps. He's always conscious. So in this world, we also only know different states of consciousness. The waking state, the dream, and the sound sleep state. Thus we are conscious, and God is conscious, and it becomes evident that if we want God, we shall have to search him out in our inner consciousness. We must always seek consciousness and consciousness, just as we must seek a bird among birds, and not among beasts. The same way, we must not search for God in unconsciousness. What is unconscious? Matter is dead and unconscious. Therefore, God must not be sought in matter. We must seek him in consciousness, and that is inside our own self.
Now, of course, we've talked about the idea that even matter has a certain sentiency to it, but it's very difficult to see God in that sense. So he's emphasizing that it's unconscious, but in the ultimate sense, you could say that matter also has a certain level of consciousness, because Brahman and Maya are one, Prakriti and Purusha are one. They all come from the oneness. So they all have to have consciousness in there at some point. But it's how obvious it is and how easy it is to see it. And it's not easy to see it in matter. It's not easy to see it in the world. And of course, the world appears finite. It comes from the infinite, but as Shankara puts it, we're misperceiving it. We're misperceiving the infinite, so it appears as finite. Now, a lot of people think that the physical universe is infinite, that it goes on forever. And of course, this is one of the problems that the Big Bang people have, is they think that there's something else out there beyond the borders of our observable universe. It's just an observable universe. It's not an actual universe, and there doesn't have to be anything outside the observable universe. So these are some of the difficulties you get into. But this is the crux of things, is that God is infinite, and when you misperceive the infinite, the only mistake you can make about the infinite is that it's finite. There isn't any other mistake. That's one of the complaints about Shankara, is that, well, if you mistake a rope for a snake, you've already got knowledge of ropes and snakes. But in this case, you see, if you put it in terms of infinite and finite, it becomes a lot cleaner. If you've mistaken the infinite for something, there isn't any other mistake you can make but to see it as finite. All right, well, let's look at the next paragraph.
You may say that God may be found outside, but in reality, world does not exist apart from your consciousness. You may be very devoted to your father and mother, but when you fall asleep and forget them. Why? Because he who knows them has gone away. The conscious self has gone away from the senses, from the mind. Therefore, the external world no longer exists for him. When that conscious self comes back to his senses and his mind, you remember them. Therefore, you see that consciousness alone really exists for you. All else is forgotten.
Of course, there's that idea that God is in the universe, kind of a panentheistic idea, and in that case, you're striving to see consciousness in everything, and mystics actually experience that. They actually see it. Which Ramakrishna did. Ramakrishna saw the grass as consciousness, and everything is consciousness. And there have been several Christian mystics of the same persuasion. So that's another way to go, but he's not talking about that way at this particular moment. He's talking about seeking consciousness in consciousness itself within yourself, rather than trying to make it anything external. Because then you have the problem, of course, is that you have to realize the oneness of your consciousness with the external consciousness. All right, let's continue.
The soul alone is beginningless and endless. That world which you expect to continue to exist after you leave it exists in the universal mind, and that universal mind exists in the universal consciousness. But the small world, which exists in your individual mind, dies with you. There are two parallel creations, as we can show. What takes place in the universal creation may not take place in your creation. Suppose, for example, that a man has gone away to Bengal. Now, in God's creation, his only child dies, but he does not know it for 15 days. During the time of the death, it does not exist in his creation at all. He still thinks of his child as living, eating, playing, in just the same way as when he was with it. Then the news reaches him, and the moment that he hears of it, the child dies in his world. This shows that there are two distinct creations. The consciousness in the universal mind, however, is the same as that behind your individual mind. They're not separate, for the infinite consciousness is one. So if you can make your individual mind merge into the universal mind, then you will no longer be able to distinguish your mind from the universal mind. When a devotee or bhakta therefore wants to go to God, he does the same thing as the jnani. who seeks to go behind his own consciousness to God's consciousness.
Yeah, so he puts it very succinctly there that you have to merge the individual mind into the universal mind. And when you think of it, these little body-mind complexes of ours, we can get some solace thinking about reincarnation, and maybe we've had many human lives and so forth. But in the big scheme of things, human beings haven't been around very long. We've been around a very short time. You just have to wonder what was going on in the world before there were human beings, and what will happen 100,000, 200,000, a million years from now. There very well may not be human beings. There may be higher beings of higher consciousness, or there may be some natural catastrophe that wipes out all sorts of things, and the nature goes back to a few rudimentary forms, which then have to start evolution all over again. So these little individual consciousnesses that exist in us and in the various animals and plants that are existing now are very finite in their origin. It's only the universal consciousness or the universal mind that is eternal. All right, we'll read another paragraph too.
At present, we live in the external world, and we believe that all our happiness and misery exists there. But when we begin to search inside, we find that all things exist within ourselves, that all consciousness is there. And this is what is called introspection. Introspection is searching for God within. The more we practice this, the nearer we come to God. First, a man may not understand it practically. The moment he realizes his own nature, he will see that he is self-existent and independent of the external world. And then he will say, I cannot have come out of matter. I'm spirit. I've come out of spirit. And to spirit, I must go back. Where is spirit? Inside. Therefore, to go to spirit, I must go within. He sees that all his environments are material, while he is spiritual. So he ceases to depend on his environment, and as he detaches himself from his environment, with it, the sense of I and mine vanishes.
Another quote of Vivekananda is that God is spirit, worship him in spirit and in truth. So that goes along with what he's saying here. All right, time for one more.
Such ideas, little by little, destroy his attachment towards the world. Then gradually, with the sword of non-attachment, all the ties of the world are cut off, and he goes deeper into his own existence and finds God. That moment, the individual world disappears, and he merges into God's creation and becomes one with him. Suppose there are two fields, one higher than the other. The upper field is full of water. Now if you cut a channel, the water will flow naturally into the lower field until the water raises to the level of the upper field. Then the surfaces are no longer two. They become like one unbroken body of water. So when the devotee goes to God, draws only inspiration from God, then God thought flows naturally into his heart. There remains no difference between him and his Lord. For that reason, Sri Ramakrishna teaches us that God and his devotee are one and the same.
All right, well, a few announcements before we close. We have several special events coming up in July. we have first the July 4th celebration on Thursday. That's the Trabuco Monastery in Orange County's annual celebration of their founding day, you could say. And the whole facility was started by Gerald Hurd as an interfaith college, you could say, and he donated that to the Vedanta Society, and so that we've maintained it as a monastery ever since. And so if you're able, you can go down to the Trabuco Canyon Monastery and celebrate the 4th of July. Of course, it's associated with Vivekananda because he was so admiring of the sense of freedom in the United States that he chose to leave his body on July 4th, which was, of course, our Independence Day and still is. Then after that, we have the celebration, the open house at the Vivekananda House in South Pasadena, which is at 309 Monterey Road. And that's the house where Swami Vivekananda stayed for a little over a month in the year 1900, excuse me, 1900. He's still there, but anyway. 1900, and it was when he, Tantine got a telegram to come see her dying brother in Los Angeles, and it turned out her dying brother was being cared for by Mrs. Blodgett, who had been to the Parliament and was a huge fan of Swami Vivekananda. And so when the two met, they made arrangements for Swami Vivekananda to come out. And when he came out to lecture in Los Angeles, the Mead sisters, who lived in South Pasadena, went to hear his lectures because they had already read his first book on Raja Yoga. And after, I think, maybe the second lecture that they went to, they asked him if he would consider staying with them for a while longer and giving lectures in the Pasadena area. After he visited their house, he agreed. And so that's how we got Swami Vivekananda here in Southern California. And many years later, in the 50s, what was his name? Montague. Don Montague, was it? Was able to purchase the house and donated it to the Vedanta Society, and it's been maintained as a pilgrimage shrine place for Swami Vivekananda ever since. So that's a week from tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Then we'll have a sound bath the following Friday after that. And then the next week, Swami Sarvapriyananda, who is, of course, a very popular speaker, will be speaking after the Sunday lecture. He'll be doing a Sunday lecture, and then he's giving a 3-class series, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday the next week. It will be first come, first serve, so we will have overflow rooms, but it's expected to be rather crowded, and we have strict limits on how many people the fire department will allow us to have in the temple. So please obey the ushers, who will keep people out once it is reached capacity, and you will have to go to the overflow rooms for that. After that, the Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursday classes will continue, except for that special series. Of course, there's no Thursday class on the 4th of July. All right, so that concludes the announcements, and we'll look forward to seeing you in September, and perhaps for the sound bath in the middle of July. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with from under the things we see, Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.